Hey everybody, it's Pooch Van Druten here along with Chris Rabold.
What's going on, everybody?
We are episode 18, and we sure are enjoying it. Everybody subscribe to our YouTube channel, please. Talk to all your friends about us.
Let them know.
Yeah, let them know. We're trying to make this thing just an honest, organic discussion about audio, and we hope that you guys are enjoying it. There's no motivation here. I hope you guys can see that. We're not trying to sell manufacturers, or in fact, I think we're beating up manufacturers more than anything else.
I think we've fucked ourselves a little bit as this goes on. No one's going to want to work with us anymore.
We're gonna go back to work in a year, and all the manufacturers are gonna be like, "Yeah, no, we don't want to."
We're gonna get some bad looks.
That's not true. We love all the stuff. But along those lines, we've had a lot of questions, and keep those coming, by the way, guys, please. We really enjoy doing that. And, a lot of the inspiration for the topics that we choose are actually come from your comments. But we will also be doing Q&A specific episodes coming soon. But anyway, along with the gear and manufacturer thing, I thought that maybe we would talk a little bit about, I know that both you and I rent gear back to artists. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit how that goes for you. Who do you talk to when you're talking about renting something, and what do you rent, and how does that come about when you're speaking to an artist or a manager or whatever?
Right. I can say that for myself, I own gear, and it's all gear that I use a lot. Like, I don't buy something. I will. I haven't in a long time, if I'm honest. I will buy something kind of on a whim. But by and large, I kind of have some just truly staple pieces. And so I choose the gear that I know I'm going to use. And I choose that gear. Well, let me say this. If I didn't have it, it's exactly what I would spec.
I understand. And so why is it that you don't just spec it? Is it just because you're thinking that it might be hard for someone to get it, or is it truly another source of income for you?
Yeah, for me, what it is, and for a lot of us that have chosen to make the investment, I cap what I get at dynamics and effects processing. Essentially, it's all for me, because when you own your own gear, there's the upkeep. There's the maintenance, sure. And I don't want to, for me personally, I don't want to stay current with updating my desk and having the right retrofit cable, fucking whatever. I don't want to do all that. So for me, it's microphones and it's outward processing, but not just analog. Like what I have is I own a pile of outboard gear, most of which I've used for a very long time. Some newer pieces have made their way in there. I then have 2 Waves Extreme servers. I then have 2 UAD live racks. I have some near field monitors that I'm looking at right now. Some JBL 708Ps, which I like a lot. I like their predecessor, the 6328s a ton as well. And then just some little stuff here and there. But for me, I keep it at those things. And I made the investment. I'm willing to do the upkeep on those, which are very minimal. And it is something that, it's a source of income. It's not just I bought them because I like them. I did buy them because I like them, but I have a goal with them. And that goal is I want to, particularly on these longer tours, as you're out there for a while, I want to make some money back on my on that investment.
For sure.
And who I talk to, the way that it's worked for me in the past is basically, the production, let's just say it's the production manager. Production and the vendor cut a deal. They They have spec'd out. It's the PA. It's all of these things, and I then give them my gear list, just as any of us always would, and then they have their value for those things. So I don't really determine the value, at least not in my experience. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what yours has been, but I'm kind of beholden to whatever the deal that is cut between production and the sound company, right? So if they cut it, I'm just going to make up a number. If they said, well, what Chris Rabold usually would want would be $100 a week, then I now am charging. Again, I didn't broker the deal. I'm now charging $100. So that's where it gets kind of tricky, because then you might have another company that goes, oh, that's $1,000 a week. Then I get to charge $1,000. But the way I've done it is what do? I get money from the sound company, because I'm essentially renting it to the sound vendor,
right?
Who then supplies it for the client, who is who I'm mixing for. Does that resonate with your experiences?
It does. It does. I've done it both ways. So I'm the guy that has the entire front of house package, along with stage racks and snake and everything. It's evolved into that, but I have just found that it is an additional source of income that over time, is a second income into what I've got going on. Now, it's managing it is tough. Exactly what you said. The argument against bringing your own gear to a gig is that you have to maintain it, which is a real pain in the ass when you own an entire front of house system. Every time that thing comes back from a festival run, you have to tear everything apart, clean it all up, put it all back together. And you have to have a place to do that. Thankfully, Kevin Taylor McCarthy has a kind of a regional sound company in Detroit and lets me store my gear there. And kind of it's a real sound company with, all the things that you need in order to maintain an entire rig. If I didn't have that and I was having to do it like in my garage, I don't know that I would be doing. I don't know that I would be doing, because it is a royal pain in the ass to maintain all of that gear, even when it's in the best circumstances with the right tools. And it's something that you have to do. I spend weeks where, I'll go up 2 weeks or 3 weeks before a tour, and I'll be in Detroit for 3 weeks prepping all of our gear to go out on something. And then when the gear returns, I have to fly up to Detroit for another week to clean everything up after that long ass tour. So there are definitely arguments for not doing it. However, if you can get it to a place where your gear makes money, then it can be a sizable, chunk of money. I'll give you an example. Probably 6 years ago, I had to take a $500,000 loan out to purchase a bunch of gear. The point I'm getting to is that it took me 6 years to pay that loan off. All right. And just now, moving forward, I would be making money on that gear, because in that 6 years, I took every dime that piece of gear, or that all of that gear made, and poured it back into the loan that I made 6 years ago. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing that you don't think about with all of this stuff is, in that 6 years, there's been technology advances that I've had to purchase another $150,000 worth of stuff to stay on top of the advances. So now we're into, $650,000 basically, that over the course of 6 years, that is now just getting paid off and is now just making me money. Now, what's hard about that is that there's gear in there that is now, for instance, there are 8 Mac Minis in my front of house rig doing all kinds of different things, but they are 2010 Mac Minis.
Right.
Or 2012 Mac Minis. So they're 8 years old now or more. They're going to start to die like soon. So now I'm going to have to replace as they die over the course of probably the next 3 years or so. I'm going to have to replace 8 Mac Minis. You know what I mean? So, and it's not just that, it's all of the stuff that's in there that has now been drugged all over the world for 6 years. So you can see where this is going, right? Like it's a good idea and it is a second income, but it's also, it's not I'm going to make $1 million doing this, you know? I do it for 2 reasons. One of the reasons is I want to have, you know, for selfish reasons, I want to have all the best gear and the gear that I want specifically. I don't have to worry about speccing it. I don't have to worry about arguing with the sound company. You know, if they don't own the piece of gear, like, you know, you guys are going to have to go buy that, you know. I don't have any of those arguments because I'm bringing that all to the table. I'm bringing all of my stuff. And as far as it being a sell to an average manager or a band, why wouldn't they want to hire the gear that I think is appropriate? They hired me, and they hired me for how I make it sound. And I said, well, in order for you guys to get what, you know, if you want it to sound like what you're hiring me for, then you guys need to rent this gear. The specifics to that are a lot like what you said. Most of the time, I make deals with sound companies. And so I'm lumped into the big check that is written by the artist. So the artist rents all their gear from Clair Brothers, let's say, and then I am sub-renting gear to Clair Brothers. You know, most sound companies are happy to do that because it means that they can take their inventory and move it somewhere else to another tour that's needed. So the fact that I'm bringing an SD7 to a tour means that they don't have to source one of their SD7s to support Iron Maiden, for let's say. So anyway, it's you know, people always ask me about this. They're like, you know, because they know that I rent I carry my own front of house gear, and it is great. But I'm telling you, it's not always this big money making thing that you think it is. I think mainly the problem is that we make decisions that are audio nerdy based, right? So I want, as an engineer, I want the top of the line best stuff with, you know, it has to be the Ferrari, you know, it has to be the best fucking thing, whatever.
Price tag.
Yes. That comes with a huge price tag. So incorporating that into what's happening may not be the best business decision, if that makes sense. Like, I think if I were only worried about, hey, I want to make money with this, there would be different decisions going on. Like, I would be choosing maybe a platform that I know that I could deal with, but wasn't super happy about using, but it's half the money. If I were only worried about business, that's what I would do. But it's not true. What I worry about is getting the best result for the client that I work for, which is kind of counterintuitive to business, if that makes sense.
It does. You know, I'm just sitting here thinking, I think it's, you know, a big thing to consider if you want to go down this route is, what's the reality of yourself? You know, how much do you, because like you've got your own console. I mean, there's a lot that goes, there's so much that goes on just a literal moving parts level to a software level. And if you're someone that is genuinely interested in that, or has the, I don't know, whatever that is, that allows you to keep current with things, then do that. And I know myself, and you know, it's interesting. I'm sure if we looked at the weekly takes for both of ours, yours would outweigh mine, but so did the cost, which is what you're saying. Right. You know, so does the time spent, and mine is smaller. But I know me. I know I'm only going to put so much amount of time into it.
Yeah.
So I feel very confident. Mine is it's a smaller scale, but it's still like a pile of stuff. Yeah. And I tell you what, man, I am so grateful for having done it, because I've gotten used to that little bit of extra, anywhere from a little bit to, man, it definitely matters, particularly if the tour is of a longer duration. That really, really, really adds up.
It sure does. Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of different sides to this, right? I tell people this all the time. Like you, oftentimes I don't get to decide what the overall cost is. If there is an argument, and sometimes there is, like the negotiation goes like this: hey, I'm bringing my front of house rig. Claire Brothers would charge X amount of dollars for the gear that you've spec'd. That's what we are going to charge the client. Then the client oftentimes will see, they have to know that it's my gear that I'm bringing. And this is a really important fact too. Let me take us down a rabbit hole really to the side of this. If you own your own gear and it is mission critical gear, you need to make some sort of relationship, or not a contract, but at least kind of a spoken deal with whoever is the sound company, that if your gear takes a shit, then they are going to treat it as if it were their gear.
Right.
So I'm really asking Claire Brothers, for example, to back me up with all of the resources that they have, in that if my SD7 were to break, they would come to the rescue just like they would if it were their SD7. Now, along with that, I have relationships with manufacturers, so I could call Digico and Digico could make that relationship happen. You know what I mean? Like if a console were to break, they could drop ship me a console, but it's just better to have that relationship with the sound company, right? So make sure when you're doing all of this, number one, transparency. Everybody's got to know what's happening. Like the artist that you're working for has to know that it's your gear. You can't be like trying to hide it from them that it's, oh no, this is Claire Brothers gear, whatever. They need to understand the logistics of all of what's going on. So just be real clear about that. Then number two, have a kind of a side deal with that vendor, that, hey, listen, I love you guys, and it's a symbiotic relationship, right? It's like, I am keeping that gig for them and using their speakers and using their infrastructure with all this other stuff besides front of house. I'm happy to do that for you, but you guys have to back my ass up when my SD7 takes a shit.
And I'll tell you, I had a conversation one time with a sound company, a major player, who just in their time in this business, which is not a short amount of time, had just really never done that with engineers before. And they felt, I wasn't asking them to, in fact, I was just having a conversation with them, just a friendly, catch up on the phone. And they mentioned someone else that was wanting to do that. And I could tell they were really miffed at it, at the notion. And I was very honest with them. I'm like, well, I do that. I hadn't worked with them in several years. It's like, I do that. And really, until I spoke to this one particular company, I've never really had anybody had a problem with it, because like you said, it frees up inventory. There's an argument. I could see the argument of like, yeah, but it's money we don't have. What if we don't have a home for that other inventory? It kind of depends on how busy the company is.
That's exactly right. So if it is a mom and pop kind of organization, and they were counting on renting the one SD7 that they own, they were counting on renting that to this artist, then you run into some conflicts, and then I don't know, but it's to their benefit that we have this symbiotic relationship, right? Because listen, I am never the guy that's going to sink a company, because they're not playing nice with me or whatever. If they are the sound company, they are the sound company, and I'm going to work with them to make sure that they continue to be the sound company for whatever band it is. But it's in their best interest to keep me happy, right? Like to say, hey, we'll work with you, and if you want to use your gear, fine. Because ultimately they're getting the bulk of the money, the speaker rental money, and all the rest of the infrastructure, all the stuff on stage, and all that kind of stuff is way more money than the piece that I'm taking out of this.
Yep. Go ahead.
No, I just mean, so do you want 3/4 of it, or do you want nothing? You know what I mean?
Well, that's what I was going to say. And that's the synergistic kind of thing, that it's in everyone's best interest to play nice. And what surprised me about that phone call that I mentioned was, it got to the point where they were basically just saying, well, if someone's bringing that gear, then that's on them. And we're essentially, basically they were kind of saying, if it is mission critical, if the console took a shit, they don't know that they're really,
you're on your own
to fix it. And I was like, and not because, I didn't really challenge them too much because I just wasn't going to, but in my mind, I'm like, now look, I get it. I am there's an argument that I'm taking money from your pocket.
I know.
But to your point, there's also the argument or the conversation that, hey, if we can all do this together, when I leave this client, I'll call you again because we've got a great working relationship. Then you've got 75 from this one and 75 from this one versus 100 from this, and you'll never see my ass again.
Yeah.
And so it was it was just strange to hear that, because again, while I am taking some of their revenue stream, aren't we all in this to put on the show? And I don't mean that in any sort of fictitious rose-tinted glasses kind of way. I'm just saying, are your guys really going to stand there cross-armed while there's smoke pouring out of the console?
Right. I know.
So that's the only time. But I'm almost glad that I am glad I had the conversation, because it showed me that you really do make sure ahead of time, or don't just 2 weeks before the prep stroll up and go,
hey, by the way,
do it early on, let it, and I've had companies, they send me the spreadsheet that shows the breakdown, the return of investment. So it's all above board. We're all looking at, but it's crazy the way prices can vary. And I know you've seen that yourself, where, literally things are valued 5 times higher on this deal versus this. And so that's where it's always once the gear is paid off, it's always profit. But it is surprising the variance in what people are charging for things, and that's where we are kind of stuck. But I'll take being stuck at that if I'm getting more money as a result.
Totally. First, to just address what we were just talking about, the only time that I've ever run into situations where somebody was bummed about me coming with gear is a super small company that is, they feel threatened, like I'm taking their money away from them. And then there's a discussion, and, if I'm really thrown into that situation, I might even negotiate with them to take their gear and put the gear that I own on another gig, because I can make money even when I'm not in front of my console. So I can act like a sound company and say, okay, well, fine. If you guys were counting on that money for that SD7, I'll go rent my SD7 over here,
And that just reminds me, you hear stories of people where this really works out for both parties, where they say, you go out, you rent your console on a Claire tour, and then that tour is over, you're not working for a while, and they need an SD7, then your desk, hey, they suddenly have another SD7 in their inventory, so to speak, in their arsenal that they can deploy. And then so it's win-win for both.
Yeah. So, I will tell you, it's funny, I don't really rent my SD7 out too much. And the reason is that, the few times that I've done it, unfortunately, man, people don't treat gear like you treat your own gear. And so I've sent my SD7 out on a couple of gigs, had to come back and just be like, what happened? Scratches and, all kinds of stuff. And So I would say to all of you out there, even people that aren't renting your gear, treat gear like it's your own. Don't keep beating it up, you know. And just because it's a multi-million-dollar company like Clare Brothers doesn't mean that you should beat up their gear. You know what I mean? It's like someone spent a bunch of money making sure that all of this, you know, is good for you and operational. And especially think about things like interconnect. You know, people treat cabling horribly, and cabling is one of the most expensive things about what you have. You know, I would say in each one of my racks, in the internal part of it, and then the interconnect from it, is close to about $10,000 in cable.
I believe it.
So when we're talking about, you know, 6 racks, we're talking about $60,000 just in cabling. Right. So, you know, that NT14 that you kind of just threw in a cable box, you know, that's a chunk of money, man. You know, it's like treat gear like it's your own. And I do and always have treated gear like it were my own.
Even just, it's funny, even on an aesthetic level, I'll tell you what, we did our systems engineer, which might be that was one of my favorite ones of these that we've done. That one was a lot of fun. I've gotten a lot of good feedback from that.
Yeah, it was good.
That relationship. But I'll tell you something that like says a lot to me is when people from companies when the dust starts piling up on the gear and the shit gets dirty and there's janky knobs that they're okay with and you're right, when it's yours, it's a whole other level of concern. But you watch that happen and you realize that really, you would like to think most people do treat gear really nice and kind of care, but more times than not, people are just, and because we do use stuff that's oftentimes very robust, very rugged, and the point is just to work, and everyone's tired, you know, where people don't really often treat things very nice.
I know. So treat your stuff nice, because I want you to treat my gear nice.
And I'll see that when I'll oftentimes think, I'm like, man, does he ever clean that? And I'm just like, what else is he not paying? Like, kind of.
I know. Get you on the down the road of conspiracy theory.
Right. Right.
But anyway, let's speak to the money, because that is always the hardest. That was the second part of what you were just talking about. I've been in a few situations where a manager or a business manager is now in the loop that it is actually my gear that's going to show up there, and thinks that they can take that opportunity to charge less money. In other words, Clare Brothers would say, for instance, hey, we're going to charge X amount of dollars for this gear. But since you're bringing it, we're going to offer you, less money. And that's a super hard discussion. And so the way that I get around that is I have friends in all kinds of companies, and I ask them, and I know it takes some time for them to do it, but I will go to sales rep people and be very clear with them and say, listen, this gig is not coming to you. It is definitely a sound image gig. But do me a favor. Could you take a list of my gear? Here's my list, and bid on it as if it was coming to you, so that I can get a collection of 3 different major sound companies' numbers of what my gear is worth. Right. And you'll be amazed to know that, no bullshit, I did this on purpose, and I said to them, do not go looking at other sound companies or ask me what other people are bidding on this. I want an honest bid from you on what this gear is. Bid on it like you want the gig, right? And believe it or not, 3 different major sound companies all came back to me within like $500, which,
oh wow,
when you're
I
talking,
thought you were going to say the opposite.
No,
I think that's because everyone has a good idea of what the market value is, and everyone's operating within such small margins. Yep. It's really all about who's going to give it away, particularly when it comes to front of house stuff. Because, for instance, the stuff that I own, which is all the processing, and that's the kind of stuff that they could be like, you know what, just suddenly the front of house costs. And we all know there's companies out there that, they're known for underbidding, and that's how they exist. Where it turns out where production's really just paying for the console. And everything else out there, every computer, everything they just threw in the deal. But I think at the end of the day, they all know kind of what fair market value is, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, 100%. But here's where the problem is. Fair market value is often really skewed. So, for instance, when we're talking about an SD7 that has quantum engines in it, and then 2 stage racks that are filled with 32-bit cards, we're talking of, a cost of upwards of, $400,000, right? For all of that stuff, versus another consoles company that has all the same infrastructure, can do all that, the same amount of channels and all that kind of stuff, but its cost is about $150,000.
Yep.
Those two things rent for the same amount of money.
Yep.
So there's something wrong with that, right? Like, so me being an equipment owner, I look at that and say, well, why the hell does this thing that I paid 3 times as much money as something else rent for the same amount of money in the whole business? Not just one sound company, all of them do it. Mm-hmm. And that is where it becomes the mistake to be not the businessman, but be the engineer. Because you make decisions on buying the Ferrari and forget that it costs you, $1,000 to get the oil changed,
right?
As opposed to buying, the Honda that costs you $25 to get the oil changed. You know what I mean? Yep. And what I hate about that is you and I and everyone that's out there listening to this can get similar results out of both of those things. It's a lot harder in the cheaper version to get a result that we consider good. And if you put that cheaper version next to the Ferrari, you're definitely going to know which is the Ferrari. But in general, we are here to make things sound good. So I can get a result out of both of these things. So from a business perspective, it is totally the wrong choice to buy the Ferrari, if that makes sense. I'll give you an example. I purchased the very first year that profiles came out. I bought a profile, an Avid profile. Probably the best investment I've ever made in my entire life. That thing paid for itself 6 times over.
I'm sure it did.
And that's because it was a relatively cheap console at the time, and its rental rate was the same as the Ferrari. And so I benefited from that. Now, did I have great shows on that platform? I sure did. And did it sound great? Yes, I got a great result out of that. But being the business owner, I should buy more profiles. Does that make sense?
Oh, for sure.
So,
for sure.
I don't know. I'm trying to share all this information with you and be really honest about it because, people ask me all the time, hey, man, how is it renting your gear? And my answer is it can't be short. It has to be the 40 minutes that we've just been discussing this because there's so much involved in it. Yes, it will make me money. Does it make me tons of money? No. Is it a tool that I love to use every day? Yes. Is the maintenance super hard? Yes. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, man. I mean, you really have to make a decision if you're going to go down this road. There are a lot of things you have to really want to do it, I guess, if that makes sense. It's not just, hey, this is going to make money for me.
It's not. And you got to think about, in what way are you touring? Are you a guy that tours 40 weeks out of the year? Or are you a guy or gal that tours 20 weeks out of the year? Because I've also seen pricing structures that are different, where the ROI, the return on investment, it's, in other words, their pricing structure. Companies will structure it differently based on, they'll have like a set point, and past a certain number of weeks, it rents for this. Below a certain number of weeks, it rents for this. So yeah, there's the allure, and there's the, you know, how cool is it to have your own stuff? And then you think about making that money back, but like how much are you really out? How quickly? Like you said, you tour all the goddamn time.
Yeah.
It took 6 years to pay off because you bought the, you know, mothership.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? But you also get mothership results, you know?
Yes.
So it's just, you have to, it's just like any purchase. It's just like any purchase in the world out there. You just got to really think, what does this look like long term? Yeah. What's in my best interest? You know,
the last thing I want to point out about this before we move on to a little kind of a related topic is that if you notice in all of this discussion and what I've kind of been imparting knowledge on you guys is that all of what we've just discussed depends on relationships with people, right? Yep. So I have to have a relationship with people in sound companies in order for this to work. I have to be able to call up my guy at such and such a sound company and just be like, hey man, I just got this gig. They want to use you, but I'm going to bring my gear. Let's talk about that. How are we going to make this happen? And have that person be in your court and work with you to make that happen, which goes to show in all of these things that we've talked about where, you know, if you're a dick, man, people won't talk to you and you're going to miss out on this opportunity as well.
Yeah. And if they know, if you're not in good standing with someone, they know you're the guy that brings that brings their gear in, and they're cutting that deal. Guess what's going to get the shit that you're trying to bring in.
No, I know. And then you got to fight and say, well, you know, hey. So luckily I've never been in that situation because I try to work with people. Like I said, if I get tons of pushback, my answer is always like, okay, fine, I'll take my gear and rent it somewhere else. I understand that you guys want, you know. Anyway, lots of stuff, you know, there. Lots of stuff to think about when you're renting your own gear back to artists. Kind of along the same lines, but you know, in regards to talking about money issues. I thought that maybe we talk a little bit about, I think we are both in a place in our careers where we have made some deals with artists and managers that either contain some sort of retainer or are in a way for the artist to kind of lock us up and make sure that we're going to be there for either their next tour or when there's a break or whatever. I don't know. Let's speak about that a little bit and what that looks like, because I bet there's some guys out there that haven't had that opportunity. And what is it that they should know about the pitfalls about that?
The first thing that comes to mind is know the territory that you're in. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, if I'm out and I'm mixing front of house for $1,000 a week and it's a trailer attached to something, that band is probably not in the position to retain me at all, even on 2-week breaks. You know what I mean? Like, they
can't afford the $1,000 a week they're paying you.
They can bear. You're lucky to be getting that. So this kind of goes back. We did one on I think we did one on contracts in general or something business related. It's kind of like know when and where that you kind of have the floor and the ability to ask for things that are realistic for that artist. So that's the most important thing, is know when it's appropriate. And I honestly, I feel like you'll know. There's those reaches when you're not sure, maybe if the band is coming up or, you know, but by and large, you're going to know. And if it's an established act, you will know. I mean, you'll know, like, yeah, this is a gig, and that's customarily what they do. So I just kind of assess the lay of the land. It's discussed immediately. I mean, it's right up there with I'm asking for this much, you're suggesting this much, we settle on, or, I mean, it's right there. That's the second part of the conversation, is how do we handle downtime? And downtime meaning two things. It means time between legs. It means at what point in time does retainer kick in? In other words, 50% retainer kicks in after 10 days of being off, 2 weeks of being off, at which point I go on, or is my retainer situation one where conceivably I get paid full rate with this artist when I'm mixing for them, and then when I'm not, I'm on an agreed upon percentage. You know, you would hope it's 50%, but you hear stuff all across the board, and that's for the duration of our time, as long as we're both alive. Yeah. And we all know, you know, you're hired until you're not.
Yeah.
And that's the truth of it, you know? So, so that's just it. Discuss that early on, because once they've got you and you haven't ever done it, I mean, they've got you if they say no. We never discussed that, you know?
Listen, it's to their benefit. If you make yourself valuable to an artist, it's to their benefit that they hold on to you. And I've expressed that to management and artists, and just say, listen, you know, I think I've done a good job here, and I think that I can continue to do a good job. You're going to want to hold on to me even when you have these downtime breaks. I'm a guy that's, been getting offered gigs all the time. I have to work. I can't just sit here and wait for an artist for 6 months to fire back up again. I'm going to get offers during that time, and, you know, I'm going to have to work. So we are going to have to work something else to prevent me from, you know, going somewhere else. It's to their benefit to do that. You know, I've negotiated deals in two ways. One of the deals is just like what you talked about, where the second discussion, once we've discussed salary during touring, is the second question after I say that's how much after we've negotiated my tour salary, is then there's always almost every band wants to pay you less for rehearsals. And I always say to them, not a chance. That's where I work the hardest.
Especially for people in our role.
Yeah. I should be charging you double for rehearsals is what I tell people. Seriously.
Right.
Because seriously, I mean, those are the days that I work 15-hour days, you know, when they do rehearsals, and then I stay another 6 hours or 7 hours doing virtual playback. And those are the days that I'm working the hardest. So if you have an artist that, or a manager that wants to negotiate 50% salary for rehearsals or whatever, I'd try to stay away from that, because that's really when we work the hardest.
Yeah. If I'm gone from home, you got me.
Yes.
I mean, like that's it.
Yeah. If I walk out my front door, it's X amount of dollars. All right. So then the next conversation is just like what Chris said. What happens when we're off for 2 weeks? What happens when we're off for 4 weeks? What happens when we're off for 6 months? What are their plans for that? And I've had varying degrees of offers in that. I've had artists say to me, well, we pay 50% of your salary on off time, regardless of if it's 3 weeks or 6 months or a year. Okay, cool. That's great. I've had other artists that stagger it. You get 50% until a month, and then 25% after that, or, you know, whatever. So all of these things are negotiable, and you guys should, just like the initial negotiation of salary, you guys should have a number in your head that you're willing to go whatever the lowest amount is. 2 times in my career with 2 major artists, I've made a deal that is totally not any of that. I've made a deal where I get a same check every week, 52 weeks a year, for as long as I work for them, whether they work 8 months that year or whether they worked 2 months that year. Mm. Now, what's difficult about that deal is you have to really kind of pay attention to the MO of the band, because they could take that opportunity to all of a sudden next year they're going to tour 12 months straight.
Right.
And the money that you've negotiated is now small in comparison. So it takes a lot of research when you're negotiating that deal. But I got to tell you, I like that deal. I like getting the same check no matter whether I'm touring or whether I'm sitting at home. It's kind of like having a real job where, people that are used to getting a paycheck every week, and I did that for a bunch of years with Linkin Park, and I've done it with another major artist. So I don't know. Have you run into that or ever made that deal?
For a long time. I did that for 11 years, I think it was.
Cool.
But that's the only time I've ever done it. And I was aware while that was going on, I was like, this is not like, those are not very normal situations. Like if you've got one of those, you're in a pretty unique place. And I always knew and said that to myself, that this is something special. I think it's also important that we point out what retainer is. And also maybe some of the catch-22 that goes along with it. Retainer is retaining your services essentially, and people vary on how they feel about this, but it's really, you're just being retained through the day, through that day or through that week that you're paid, and people will look at this different. And I've seen it worded different in contracts. I've also, mind you, been under contracts that are 100% handshake. Like I just cleaned out a file cabinet over here the other day, and it was all deal memos and contracts. And I was like, you know what? I can get rid of this. For nostalgic reasons, maybe I keep it, but it was interesting. Some of them were this big, some of them were that big, some of them never existed. I'd never signed a thing to work with that person, But anyway, they are retaining your services. So if they call, you are at their beck and call. Now, some people will tell you, but you have to have 2 weeks heads up. Some people will say, no. If my artist is playing an acoustic guitar at a Chili's tomorrow, I'm there no matter what. So, and also know what retainer means. Have that in writing, or at least an understanding of what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm the guy that, hey, listen, if you're paying me, everybody else is second fiddle. So that
too, even the couple weeks thing, if you've been paying me for 6 months,
right,
we haven't done a goddamn thing.
Right.
I should probably get on that plane tonight. That's my personal feeling.
I feel that way too. I have never been in a retainer situation where even when a band came to me and said, hey, next week we need you to be here, and I was, working for somebody else, I went to that, second fiddle band and said, hey guys, sorry, I've been on retainer. I told you I was on retainer. Now that's a good point though.
Yes.
If I'm working,
go there.
Yes. If I'm working with a band while I'm being retained from another band, that band knows for sure that I'm being retained. When we talk about contracts, there's a good part to contracts and a bad part to contracts. One is that most of the contracts that are sent to me, the ones that I've signed, are a little bit one-sided for the band. You know what I mean? There's all these kind of clauses in there about, like if I spoke not highly of a band, they could sue me. Those are all like clauses that are part of this contract. It's pretty intense. And every contract that I do, I have a lawyer look at. Okay. So make sure that you do, because you don't want to sign yourself into some contract that's just like, what is happening? Right. So anyway, I'm just saying that the best best thing to do in all of these things that we're talking about is transparency. Like I tell everybody that in any sort of situation, if they come to me and they say, hey, we want you to work for these 2 months for so-and-so, my answer to them is absolutely. I am available, and I know absolutely I'm going to be available because of past experience. I know that Iron Maiden is only going to work during these months. However, I am under contract with them, and if they did call on Friday to be there Saturday, I'd be flying on Saturday. You know.
Yep. And that's a delicate conversation too, because the one thing you don't want to do when someone calls you with interest in your services is to sell them out of you.
Yes.
In other words, you need to be forthcoming, and absolutely does it need to come out right away, but it needs to be not, you don't want it to be such a caveat that they're going, yeah, but he might, and it's really, you have to let them know that you mean it. You got to go when you got to go.
I always tell, the way that I get around that is I tell them, I say, listen, if I were under contract with you, you would want me to be there. You know what I mean? So
yeah. And so here, and I was going to say, and to that point, a lot of people, this is the catch-22 of being on retainer, is if you end up with certain clients that are of a certain stature, a lot of times they don't want to be number two to anybody.
Right.
And I have run into that before, and I totally understand. Like, they're not the kind of clients that would anyone would ever leave them for anyone else. It's like, but that's the deal I'm under. So, and I've also heard of guys, I've heard of two kinds of guys. First of all, I've heard of someone who very famously didn't share with either act that he was on retainer with the other, got retainer from both, and then you would expect, you see how this movie played out, fucked himself, and doesn't have a good reputation, as a result of these acts. I had a thing last year where I was under retainer with one artist, or on retainer with one artist, and then I was going to start working with another artist who also offered me a retainer, and I just said, look, I can't in good faith do this.
I've never taken a retainer from two bands.
Oh, it'd be a horrible thing to do. It is the definition of conflict of interest. It's like, I can't do that, because if this other person calls, I got to go.
Yeah.
So, but, and quickly, I wanted to say there's also, and I had this recently in the past few years where I had a little bit of downtime. I was on retainer, and, so many people, they just immediately, it was almost like I was in the running for all these gigs. They were calling with interest, but then they essentially were like, yeah, but you're locked in with such and such. So you can be known. And that happens to a lot of people where they're tied in with one act for a long time.
Yeah.
Like their phone stops ringing because people know that they're, so it works both ways. Your availability is going to go down. But your consistency of that check, is going to go up. So
I think it's something that's a really good point to point out to when you make the decision to sign a contract with a band and go into a retainer kind of a situation. You might be pulling yourself out of other gigs. It might be to your benefit to not do that if you think you're going to get offered other stuff. I don't know. There's all kinds of sides to this.
And that's kind of like you kind of have to be an adult with yourself. It's no different than having the same discussion with yourself. Like, do I really need to buy all this gear? Is that really in my best interest? And then you also have the conversation with yourself, like, okay, where am I in my career? What means more to me? The consistency of this employment and of being at the same place, or am I at the spot? And I've been there where, man, I love the fact that my phone's ringing all the time. I love jumping from one tour to the next, flights that I didn't have planned that show up and I'm gone. If that's where you are, then honor that and do that and be that guy for a while. But if you're at the point where you realize you got a good situation, be that person.
Yeah, totally, man.
That might be where the payoff really is.
I think that in all of this, it's about, this is a super small industry, man, and any sort of weird shit that you try to pull is going to get out, and people are going to find out about it, and people are not going to hire you. You need to be really clear about, like I said, transparency is the best way. Honest and transparent with all of the people that you're working with, and say, listen, this is how I handle it, and I don't know.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys, for coming. I hope you got a little bit out of the whole thing, talking about contracts and talking about renting gear. It's kind of another one of those business ones. But make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you go to all our social media. And thanks for coming, guys. See ya.
See ya.